Florida Republicans are reportedly trying to push President Trump to pick a Supreme Court nominee to help his election chances in the state. According to Politico, some of the biggest names in the Florida GOP are working behind the scenes to advocate for federal Judge Barbara Lagoa. Those pushing include both the state's senators, the governor, President Trump's Florida campaign director, and one of his former impeachment defense lawyers. They say picking the 52-year-old daughter of Cuban immigrants would be a great step of outreach in the perennially important Electoral College state. Here's President Trump's response when asked about Lagoa on Fox News this morning.
Tell me about Lagoa and what made her a finalist and what might tip the scales her direction.
Well, she's excellent. She's Hispanic. She's a terrific woman from everything I know. I don't know her. Florida. We love Florida. So she's got a lot of things, very smart. They're all very smart.
Our new CBS News Battleground Tracker poll shows President Trump trailing Joe Biden by 20 points among Hispanic likely voters in Florida. But that margin is 11 points smaller than it was in July, when it was about the same as Hillary Clinton did among Florida Hispanics in 2016. Overall, the race is closer in Florida than it was 2 months ago, with Joe Biden leading now by just 2 points. CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys Anthony Salvanto breaks down where things stand.
Hey there, Elaine. Let me look inside the numbers for Florida and our latest poll, how that battleground state breaks down. First of all, this is among seniors, always an important voting bloc in Florida. Yes, the president leads among them, but Joe Biden is cutting into the president's margins compared to how the president did in 2016. That is partially as a result of seniors thinking that Joe Biden might do better at protecting them from coronavirus. Now, always important, Hispanic voters in Florida. Yes, Joe Biden has a 20-point lead, but that is down a little bit. It's down 5 points from where he was this summer, about 6 points from what might be the benchmark for him and Democrats compared to 2016. Why is that so important? Well, turnout. Let me show you the regions of Florida, the way we'll look at this on election night. If I zoom in here, the red areas along the Gulf Coast, in the Panhandle, these are places the president doing well, Republicans typically do. But for Democrats, they need to run up the score in Democratic areas, specifically around Miami. They need this to cast more than a quarter of the state's votes. They need to win it by about 2/3. That depends on strong Hispanic turnout and also up and around the Orlando area. So, very important for Democrats to keep those numbers, and that's one of the things that we'll watch going forward, Elaine.
Well, for more, let's bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Hi there, Ed. We heard Anthony explain where gains are being made in Florida. What's behind those gains? Do we know?
Well, to some extent, Elaine, the president's numbers, at least among Latinos, are going back to where they were in 2016, and that's part of what's helping him overall across the state. What exactly is driving that is less clear from our poll, but we do know this. We know that, for one thing, the COVID situation in Florida has improved from where it was over the summer. We know that the economy, of course, remains a top concern for voters all across the country, but especially there in parts of Florida. We also know that among Hispanics, at least in Florida, given the diaspora of Cubans and Venezuelans who are a little more culturally and fiscally conservative, and then Central Floridians who are more Puerto Rican or Central American, that there's just a mix there that doesn't exist in other states with big Latino populations that can actually lend itself to Republican support for the president. So look, Biden would probably prefer his number be at or above 60% among Latinos in the state, but given that he's cutting into the president's advantage with other groups like white voters or seniors, he might actually be able to make it up. And all things being equal, this could be a bit more of a wash come Election Day.
Well, broadening out the numbers with Latino voters nationally, a new Wall Street Journal Telemundo poll shows Joe Biden leading by 36 points, about where Hillary Clinton was in 2016, but 13% remain undecided. What is each campaign doing, Ed, to try and win over these voters?
Yeah, and that's really quite telling. While he's got a big lead, there's still so many that are still on the fence. We know in the case of the president, he continues to talk about the issues of socialism, talks about the economy. The move he made last week to dump $13 billion in federal aid into Puerto Rico after 3 years of waiting for it was a sort of bald, on its face political move designed to try to woo potential Puerto Rican voters, especially in the state of Florida, but also to some extent in places like Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, where there's a growing population of them. And he is advertising to some extent in Spanish, and especially Spanish radio as well. For Biden, it's television advertising, it's digital advertising. But a lot of it still has to be a bit introductory. What a lot of other pollsters have found that look at the Latino populations across the country, especially in places like Nevada and Florida and Arizona, there's still a lack of familiarity with who Joe Biden really is and what he did, not only as vice president, but when he was in the Senate. I was struck last week, we had a conversation with a woman named Stephanie Valencia, who's with a Latino polling firm known as Equis Research, and she said, look, among men especially in Nevada, there's a lack of understanding really about what he did as vice president, what he had done in the Senate. And she's concerned that there's a potential for Nevada, for Democrats, to become sort of the Michigan of 2020, that state that they weren't paying enough attention to, that just in the last few days slipped away because they weren't doing enough there. And it could be that the not enough is in regards to Latino voters in Nevada who would normally favor Democrats, but where there's been real struggles in trying to turn them out, getting them motivated because of the pandemic.
Interesting to hear about that perspective. Well, Ed, all of this polling we've referenced was done before Justice Ginsburg's death, but a new Reuters survey conducted after her death Friday shows 8 out of 10 Democrats and half of Republicans think the appointment should wait until after the election. How do you see the impact of this fight playing out?
I still think it's too soon to say, but we have heard from voters over the weekend here who break down along predictable lines. Republicans or conservatives saying you might as well do it now. Democrats saying you should wait. I don't think we're really going to be able to measure this for another week or so at least. Remember, the justice has not yet been properly, given her. There's been no funeral. There's been no public memorial service. She's yet to be buried alongside her husband in Arlington National Cemetery. Obviously the president and Republicans want to move quickly. We will see what the American public starts to think of it. I think they're being reminded in these first few days since her unexpected death that Republicans felt a very different way 4 years ago, as did Democrats. And now that the shoe is literally on the other foot, they're behaving in the exact opposite way. And so let's see now in the next few days, as the political arguing continues, which side convinces the other or convinces skeptics that they're wrong or that they're right, and how this thing ultimately shakes out. I think the bigger thing to watch, Elaine, too, is what this does to potentially refocus some of the Senate fights in places like Maine, Colorado, South Carolina, the 2 races in Georgia, North Carolina, maybe even Arizona, certainly Iowa as well. All of them with Republican incumbents who are facing or were facing tricky re-elections. You wonder now if this doesn't potentially bring up more of a level of support for them among Republican base voters or independents who might have been drifting away for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Ed. All right, Ed O'Keefe for us. Ed, thank you very much.